Welcome back, and we got a great guest coming up right now. Larry Elder's with us today, and he is he's an author, but he also has his own talk show, the Larry Elder Show, and he's authored a book called Dear Father, Dear Son, a best-selling book that I think you'll find this one to be extremely fascinating in light of Father's Day. Larry, nice to have you with us. Where are you calling in from?
Morning. I'm calling from L.A.
Hey, nice to have you. How you doing down there today?
I'm doing great. Thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, not a problem, and appreciate you being with us today. Well, pretty phenomenal book. What inspired you to take it on?
Well, I wanted to talk about the importance of fathers. Obama gave a speech not long ago at Morehouse College, and he said that a kid who grows up without a father is 5 times more likely to live in poverty, 9 times more likely to drop out of school, 20 times more likely to end up in prison. When I was in college, as a freshman, I read a book that Daniel Patrick Moynihan wrote in 1965 called The Negro Family, A Case for National Action. At the time, 25% of black kids were born outside of wedlock. Fast forward, that number now is 75%. In the white community, it's about 35%. In the Hispanic community, it's about 50%. Now, there's a direct relationship between not having a father in the house, as Obama said, and crime and unemployment, dropout, you name the social problem, it's there. I told Pierce Morgan when I was on there the other day that the face of gun violence, as horrific as Sandy Hook is not some white kid in the suburbs. It's a minority kid living in an urban area, and not unlike the 15-year-old girl who performed at Obama's inauguration who was killed in one of those to whom it may concern shootings among gang members. And why did people join gangs? They join gangs because they have no fathers in the house. Tupac Shakur, the rapper, after he died, a documentary came out called Resurrection, and he said, I know for a fact if I had a father in my life, I would have had more discipline and I would have been more confident. And so, people in the inner city are telling us what's going on. We're just not listening. In 1985, there was a poll taken, and both poor people and non-poor people were asked the following question. Do you believe young poor women often have children to get additional welfare benefits? Not too surprisingly, the majority of non-poor people said no. However, 64% of poor people said yes. And so they're telling us we're just not listening.
Wow. Boy, there's a lot there. Now, your book, pretty much a true story, huh?
It is. It's about my horrible relationship with my father. I call him a junkyard dad dog. He was a Montford Point Marine. These were the first black Marines. They were the equivalent of the Tuskegee Airmen, not quite as celebrated. But there were about 20,000 of them who went through that camp in North Carolina, and my dad was one of them. He was a cook in the Second World War, and he comes out and goes back down to the South to get a job as a cook, and he's told, I'm sorry, we don't hire any N-words. None of which, by the way, I knew until I was 25 years old. My dad and I had this huge fight when I'm 15 years old. We don't speak for 10 years.
Wow.
And I'm 25, and I decided I'll sit down and at least tell him what I think of him. I figured the conversation would last about 10 minutes. I tell him what an SOB I thought he was, cold, ill-tempered, in my opinion, punished us too quickly and too severely. At the time, that's what I thought anyway. And I figured he'd say something equally harsh back, and at least we'd have a 10-minute clarification. Instead, we sat down for 8 hours. And during that 8-hour period of time, he morphed from this cold, uncaring SOB to this kind, hard-working, sensitive man who was in my life the whole time. I just mistook the exterior for lack of love. I couldn't have been more foolish. And so the book really is a 247-page apology to a man who was always in my life, and I was lucky enough to have him. And the book is hopefully designed to tell people, even if your father made mistakes, said things he shouldn't have said, punished you in ways you didn't quite like, if he was there, if he was involved, he did his job. And my father was kicked out of the house when he was 13 years old. I didn't know that until I had this conversation. The name Elder was the name of the boyfriend who was in his life the longest. He was an alcoholic who beat him up and beat his mother up. Just a series of bad boyfriends his mother had. And so this is a black boy kicked out of his house, never to return, 13 years old, on the eve of the Great Depression in the middle of Jim Crow South, Athens, Georgia. Wow. And my dad never bitched and moaned and whined about what people did to him. He told my brothers and me, hard work wins. You get out of life what you put into it. And no matter how hard you work, things are going to go bad. How you respond to those bad things will tell your mother and me whether or not we raised a man. And he said the world is very different from the world in which I grew up, and don't let people tell you that racism is going to hold you back. He says, I'm not saying racism has gone away, but for crying out loud, everything is different from the way it was when I grew up. And don't act as if it's not changed. It has changed.
Wow. So during that 10-year period, did you have any kind of a relationship with your dad other than one that was a disdainful one?
I did not. I mean, he was still there in the house. He was still paying the bills. So he was never an absentee father by any means. I just thought he was a mean, cold guy who was ill-tempered, and he worked 2 full-time jobs as a janitor. He cooked for a family on the weekend. He went to night school 3 nights a week to get his GED. So he probably averaged about 4.5 hours of sleep for decades. You try doing that and having a stay-home wife with 3 boys and see how you feel when you come home and find a bunch of rambunctious people yelling and screaming. That's how it was. And when I wrote the book, I found out that a whole bunch of people felt similar ways about their fathers. And when they got older, they realized, as I did, that their fathers did the best they could with what they knew, and they did their jobs. And for crying out loud, we were lucky enough to have somebody like that in our lives.
How did you, so after you and your dad made up, I guess is the best way to put it, what happened after that? I mean, you obviously have an improved relationship, but have you gleaned anything from him?
Good Lord, yes, and that's what the latter half of the book is about, just words of wisdom from him. When you don't have a good relationship with your father, there's an itch. There's something there, and it affects how you will react to other people. It affects you whether you're a boy or whether you're a girl. If you're a boy, it affects you in the sense of not really quite appreciating authority and having difficulty dealing with authority. And if you're a girl, if your father's not around, oftentimes the first guy who can fug up a mirror is a person that you gravitate towards. Or it makes you distrustful of men altogether because your father was not around, and therefore you don't think they're reliable. So there's damage done to both boys and girls. And in the case of my own father, my father told me that he believed in hard work, he believed in personal responsibility, and he did not like what he called victims, people that made other people make you think of yourself as being inferior. And he believes that hard work wins, and no matter how hard you work, if you work hard enough, people will reward you, and no matter your race, no matter your ethnicity. And so he was just a very positive person. He was 96 years old when he died. He died about 6 months after I finished the book, so he was able to at least know what I was doing.
Did your siblings have the same kind of relationship with your dad?
They did. I have 2 brothers, older and younger. All of us couldn't stand him. We all felt the same way. The only thing that made us feel that my father wasn't a criminal is because he married my mother. And I knew that my mother was loving, and something in the back of my mind let us know that at least he must be a human being, otherwise my mother wouldn't have married him. But we didn't understand why she married him. He was just an ill-tempered guy, but the reason he was ill-tempered is because he was tired all the time.
Were you able to lead your other 2 brothers to a reconciliation with their father?
I was. My younger brother, unfortunately, had died of diabetes some years before this, but my older brother and I sat down after I reconciled with my father, and I caused my brother to sit down with him as well. And he did, and it made my brother's relationship better, and I think it made my father's marriage to his mom, to my mom, better. They were married 56 years, and I think they treated each other a little bit better after my brothers and I reconciled with my dad.
You know, there's such a huge lesson in all of this and such a great message. How can you sum it up, Larry? Because it appears to me that if we can get fathers and sons reunited, especially some of those statistics you talk about where the dad's left the home or the son's left the home or whatever, if we can just get the family back intact, we can do more good with that than anything else.
I would say to all men, to bring a child into the world that you cannot feed, clothe, house, and educate is the moral equivalent of a drive-by shooting. And for those of us who are lucky enough to have had a father in our lives, at some point we're going to appreciate the lessons that we've learned, the lessons of hard work, and more importantly, the lesson of how to resolve disputes in an intelligent fashion, which is what we see when we see our father interact with our mothers. And they address issues of finance, of budgeting, of how to give us morals and values. We watch these kinds of things, and until we're old enough, we're not realizing the lessons that we're learning. We're not realizing that these are our #1 role model.
Wow. Well, Larry, you're fascinating. People can get a book at LarryElder.com.
That's right, or Amazon.com.
All right, sounds good. Thanks, my friend, for being with us. Best to you, and keep up the good work on your show.
Thank you very much.
I'll talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.
We'll be right back on Focus Today.